My name is Mara Keaton, 34 years old. I still had my phone to my ear before I even set down my overnight bag. Burn it all, I told my lawyer. No hello, no easing in. Just 3 words, the kind you only use when you've already crossed the point of no return. On the other end, Henry's silence stretched a beat too long, like he was giving me one final out. You're sure? He asked. I've never been more sure in my life. It had started less than an hour earlier. I'd just stumbled off a 48-hour surveillance detail, running on bitter coffee and muscle memory. Instead of heading to my apartment, I let the car steer itself toward the little house at the edge of town where my mother still lived. I didn't call. I didn't text. Something in my chest told me not to. The front door was unlocked. Nothing unusual for her. But the silence inside wasn't the kind you grow up with. This was heavy, as though the air itself was bracing for bad news. Mama? My voice echoed down the hallway, sharp against the stillness. She was in the kitchen, hands submerged in a basin of soapy water, her posture small in the fading light. The late afternoon sun slid in sideways, catching the purple bloom around her right eye. Her knuckles were red, the skin scraped raw. She glanced up, startled, before dropping her gaze back to the dishes. Don't worry about me, she murmured, voice so rehearsed it might as well have been etched into her bones. I stepped closer, my boots thudding on the worn linoleum. Who don't? I asked, sharper now. Her lips pressed together. Just don't. My phone buzzed before I could press her further. An unfamiliar number, just a link. I tapped it. And there he was. My father, on a yacht I didn't know he owned, champagne in one hand, sunglasses balanced on his smug face, his other arm draped around a woman half his age in a red dress that clung like a dare, the fabric whipping in the wind. The caption read, "Life's too short not to enjoy the ride." Something inside me went cold, solid. I didn't say a word to my mother, didn't ask the obvious. Instead, I turned down the hallway toward my childhood bedroom. The posters were gone, but the furniture sat like relics. In the corner, beneath a folded quilt, waited a black safe. I spun the combination by feel. Inside, my service weapon, 2 boxes of evidence envelopes, and a slim leather case. I flipped it open. The gold shield of the Metropolitan Police glinted back at me. Beneath it, an envelope marked with Henry's firm's name. Peterson and Hale. Sealed. Waiting. I slid the badge into my jacket, tucked the envelope under my arm, and stepped back into the kitchen. My mother didn't look up. I kissed her temple anyway. Back in my car, I sat still for a moment, feeling the weight of the badge against my ribs. Outside, the neighborhood sounds seemed unnervingly sharp. A truck rumbling down the street, a dog barking 2 houses over, the faint tick of my car's cooling engine. I dialed Henry's private line. He picked up on the second ring. Detective? Burn it all, I said. Silence. Then his measured voice. Once I start, there's no stopping. You know that. That's the point. I hung up and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I'd seen that look before, on suspects who knew the cuffs were coming. Only this time, the look was mine. And the cuffs weren't for me. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about my father's predictable midlife crisis or his equally predictable arm candy. This was about years of bruises that faded on the skin but not in memory. About my mother's voice whispering, "Don't worry about me," while her eyes begged me to do the opposite. It was about the quiet file I'd been building, page by page, every time a tip about my father's business dealings crossed my desk. He'd built his fortune on control, of money, of people, of her. And now, for the first time, control was about to slip from his hands. Because I wasn't just his daughter, I was a cop. And I knew exactly where to hit him so he couldn't get back up. I put the car in gear. The sun was setting, drenching the street in gold and shadow. For the first time in years, walking away from that house didn't feel powerless. It felt like the beginning of something inevitable. The smell of lemon dish soap can rewind me like a tape. One breath and I'm 10 again, my cheek pressed against the wood grain of the kitchen door, feeling the pattern bite into my skin. Back then, the radio was always on low, soft enough to pretend the music was what filled the air, not the tension. My mother would hum along, a thin thread of sound that wasn't meant for the song at all. And then his voice would come. My father didn't need volume to take over a room. Even at a whisper, there was steel in it, the kind that bent everyone around him into silence. Why is this house never quiet, he'd ask, though it already was. So quiet that the sound of plates tapping porcelain could feel deafening. I'd hear the clink of a glass on the counter. My mother's hum would falter. An apology would slip out, barely more than a breath, and somehow that was what lit his fuse every time. Her gentleness seemed to insult him, as if it was proof she didn't believe in his version of the world. People ask me where cops come from. A few are made at kitchen sinks. I had my tactics early. I learned which floorboards betrayed you, which shadows in the hallway could hide you if you kept still enough. The utility closet became my fortress, a flashlight balanced on my knees, pretending my Walkman's tinny music was all I could hear, while the argument in the other room shifted into a storm I could picture without seeing. When the bruises on my mother's skin didn't match the stories she told neighbors, I smiled along with her lies. Bumped into a cabinet, she'd say. In our town, cabinets were the clumsiest killers of women. Sometimes, when the house finally sank into uneasy sleep, she'd slip into my room and sit on the edge of my bed. Her fingertips would trace the seam of my blanket, her face half-shadowed by the hall light. "Baby," she'd whisper. The word was both a promise and a plea. "Don't worry about me." In a movie, that line could sound noble. In real life, it felt like a sentence we were both serving. And the thing was, he wasn't always a monster. That's the part no one wants to hear. Some mornings he made pancakes, flour dusting his forearms like fresh snow. There were photos of him laughing beside me at the park, his hand warm on my shoulder. Birthdays when he wrapped the kind of gifts no one in our neighborhood could afford, given with the smile of a man who knew generosity could be its own leash. Control can wear the mask of kindness if you squint hard enough. He ran his construction company the way he ran our house. Schedules that ticked like metronomes, money flowing exactly where he wanted it, crews that didn't question, inspectors that didn't linger. I didn't know the shape of those transactions back then, but I understood what they bought. Silence. And in our family, silence was worth everything. When I was 16, I got my first job bagging groceries at the corner market. The ache in my feet felt clean, earned. I learned the price of milk without checking a tag, learned how to carry eggs like they were treasure. I also learned how much my father hated it. He said it one evening while standing in the front hall, holding the receipt I'd left on the table. "You don't need to do this," he told me. "We're not that kind of people." "We're the kind of people who eat," I answered, before I'd learned the safety of swallowing my words. He didn't hit me. He didn't need to. The look he gave skimmed over my face like I was already dismissed, his gaze landing somewhere far behind me. And then, nothing. 3 days of silence, a punishment that landed heavier than any shout. I learned then that absence could be as sharp as a blade. On the night I turned 18, while he watched the evening news, I filled out my application to the police academy. My mother's reaction was like she'd seen a magician pull a coin from her ear, astonished and terrified to applaud in case the trick vanished. When I told my father, he laughed. "You? In a uniform?" He shook his head like he was sparing me from myself. "Sweetheart, no." I went anyway. The academy was a strange kind of sanctuary. Pain made honest. Push-ups that burned because they had a purpose. Runs that left your lungs raw because one day you might need to chase someone who was screaming. Drills that demanded you hold your ground, no matter how much you wanted to run. There was a day on the range when the instructor adjusted my grip on the gun. "Trust your hands," he said. He meant it literally, but something in me shifted. My hands, my choice, my life. My first domestic call as a rookie still buzzes in my bones. Dispatch said possible injury. Neighbors heard shouting. Morales, my training officer, glanced at me as we turned down a narrow street. "Don't decide the ending before you know the story," she said. The house was neat. They almost always are. The woman at the door smiled too quickly, her sleeves pulled past her wrists. The man behind her leaned in the hallway like he owned the oxygen. "Everything okay here?" Morales asked. "We're fine," the woman said. "We're fine," the man echoed, a beat late. Morales didn't challenge them head on. She let the silence hang until it sagged. "Ma'am, could we speak in the kitchen?" In the kitchen, a bottle of lemon dish soap sat by the sink. My throat tightened. Morales kept her voice calm, asking about injuries. The woman shook her head, but her sleeve slipped. The bruise on her wrist was the color of a coming storm. We didn't shout. We didn't lecture. We separated them. We documented. We made a door where there had only been a wall. When we walked out, the porch light clicked on automatically. The night air was cold enough to sting. Morales looked at me. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and for once it wasn't a lie. She studied me a beat longer. "You held the line. That matters." I thought about my father's laugh when I'd told him I was joining the force, thought about my mother's whispered, "Don't worry about me." I still worried. The difference was, now my worry had edges. People like to imagine there's a single, cinematic moment when a child becomes an adult, a sharp, clean break. It isn't like that. It's a slow stitching together of echoes. Doors closing, radios crackling, pens scratching out reports for people you'll never meet, but who needed you anyway. In training, they teach you how to draw a perimeter. I didn't realize I'd been doing that for my mother long before I ever wore the badge. I learned which neighbors left their porch lights on and which ones turned them off early. I learned the exact growl of my father's car engine when it turned onto her street. I noticed when her curtains stayed drawn later than usual, or when she kept the TV on after midnight. It was all quiet work, nothing she ever asked me to do. And I never told her, because in our family, watching was safer than speaking. Years later, when the yacht photo landed on my phone, none of this was random. None of it was heat of the moment anger. It was the final loop in a perimeter I'd been tightening for years. I once asked Morales how she slept carrying so many other people's nights on her back. She shrugged and said, "I plant something. Fear doesn't grow well next to tomatoes." I planted different things. Documents, names, dates, things that could stand up in court, things that didn't depend on anyone being brave at the exact worst moment. My father had taught me the architecture of control. All I was doing now was using his blueprint against him. When I picture my childhood, I don't just see the bruises. I see chalk lines on a driveway, hopscotch numbers so bright they glowed in the dusk. I see the tilt of my mother's smile as she sliced an apple, slipping me the best piece without a word. And I see the night she gripped the steering wheel in the driveway and didn't start the car. We sat breathing the same air, both pretending a decision hadn't just slipped between us like a shadow. "Don't worry about me," she said. Not as a plea this time, but as an order. I obeyed, and I waited for the day I would break it. I didn't start keeping tabs on my father because I wanted revenge. At least that's what I told myself back then. It began 2 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the kind of way big things sometimes start. Accidentally. The station printer jammed, coughing up a mess of mismatched pages. Buried among them was a subpoena request from another precinct's white-collar crimes unit looking for records on a holding company with the blandest name imaginable, North Shore Development, LLC. The address on the paperwork was my father's office. I could have set it back on the tray and pretended I'd never seen it. Instead, I read it twice, then slipped it into a manila folder before anyone else noticed. That was the first brick. From there, the folder grew slowly, deliberately, like a plant you keep in a corner, watering it just enough to survive. I pulled bank statements from public court filings, dug through property records tied to shell companies my father had once joked about over dinner, collected photos of him meeting with men whose reputations never made the society pages, but whose names never left the business section either. I didn't have a plan then, just an itch to understand the machinery that kept my mother under his thumb. As a cop, you learn that abuse isn't just about bruises or shouting. It's contracts written in a language you can't read until they own your house. It's credit cards you didn't know existed in your name until the debt arrives. It's weaving someone's entire life from threads you hold in your fist and making them believe they'd unravel without you. My father was both loom and weaver, and my mother, for all her resilience, was still tangled in the cloth. When I suggested divorce, she shut it down. "It would destroy me," she said. I couldn't tell if she meant emotionally, financially, or both, so I stopped talking about leaving. And I started preparing for taking. Henry, my lawyer, had been in my corner since my academy graduation. He never asked why I wanted property searches run on my father's companies, never raised an eyebrow when I dropped photos of yacht registrations on his desk. "We'll build a box," he said once, "and when it's strong enough, we'll drop it over him." I liked the sound of that. No shouting matches, no messy public fights that could be written off as a daughter's spite. Just a box. The first time I saw Elise, the Mistress, was in a glossy social media photo, all hair and confidence, leaning just far enough toward the camera to make the neckline work for her. She was a licensed real estate broker. It didn't take much digging to see her name on 3 property transfers into shell companies linked to my father. That's when Henry's box started to take shape in earnest. We didn't rush. That was the trick. Boxes like this aren't built overnight. They're grown, layer by layer, until the person inside doesn't realize they've been sealed in. We tied Elise's commissions to properties bought and flipped at improbable profit margins. We traced cash moving from Cayman accounts into corporate holdings in her brother's name. It was a web you could almost mistake for coincidence, if you didn't know the spider at the center. Meanwhile, I played my role. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional tense lunch where my father would ask about my cop work with the same detached interest he might have for a neighbor's new lawnmower. I'd offer safe anecdotes, a routine traffic stop, a stolen bike returned, while keeping my eyes on the details he didn't think mattered. The watch on his wrist, the tan line where a ring had been, the fact he always paid in cash, even where the staff knew his name. He never asked about my love life. I realized later it was because, in his mind, I belonged to the badge. If I was married to the job, I'd stay alone. That was his first mistake. The second was underestimating Henry. By the start of summer, we had enough to make the box heavy. Not just financials and shady property records, but the personal, photographs of my mother's injuries she'd finally allowed me to take, just in case. Copies of her medical records, vague enough to be suspicious. A thumb drive full of Elise's closings that lined up neatly with sudden influxes into my father's accounts. We were ready to move, and then the yacht photo arrived. It was almost theatrical, an anonymous number. No message, just the image of my father with Elise, framed in sun and champagne, her dress blazing red against the ocean. It was less a picture than a challenge. When I called Henry and said, "Burn it all," I didn't need to explain. In our shorthand, it meant, pull every lever at once. File the emergency protective order for my mother. Serve subpoenas for the financials. Notify the DA about potential fraud and abuse charges. This wasn't going to be a family spat in divorce court. This was going to be a siege. Henry didn't waste time. By the next morning, the gears were already turning in rooms I couldn't see, clerks stamping papers, bank compliance officers sending urgent memos, process servers walking into polished offices with manila envelopes that weighed more than they looked. Step one was money. My father's wealth was his fortress, and the walls were high. But numbers in a database can be locked with a keystroke. By noon, 3 personal accounts, and the main corporate ones were frozen, pending investigation. Step 2 was the paper trail, subpoenas to title companies, brokerage firms, and banks. Elise's real estate office was on the list, which meant she'd be getting a visit from someone very official very soon. Step 3, the protective order, an emergency no-contact shield for my mother. I knew it wouldn't stop him from trying to reach her, but it meant every call or text could become a violation with teeth. The hardest part was convincing her to sign it. I went to her house after my shift, out of uniform. She was in the living room folding laundry into precise stacks, the TV murmuring a home renovation show in the background. "I need you to sign this," I said, placing the papers on the coffee table. She glanced at them, then at me. "What is it?" "Protective order." Her mouth tightened. "I told you, I don't—" "This isn't about making a scene," I interrupted softly, sitting on the couch edge. "It's about space he can't legally cross. If he calls, if he shows up, we have recourse. Without it, he can do whatever he wants." She pressed the edges of a towel flat with her palm. "And you think that'll stop him?" "No," I admitted, "but it'll stop him from thinking he's untouchable, and it gives us leverage." Her gaze lingered on the papers, then on me. "You've been planning this?" "Yes," I didn't apologize. Her hand hovered over the pen, fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. I placed my own hand lightly over hers, steadying it. A memory flickered, her hand guiding mine to write my name in careful block letters at the kitchen table. She signed. That night, I met Henry in his office, the air heavy with the scent of leather and old paper. Flowcharts covered one wall, red lines linking company names, account numbers, and faces. "This," he said, tapping a circle around Elise's name, "is where it's going to get loud. Once she's served, he'll know we're not just circling the wagons. We're coming for the gate." "Good," I said. "Let him know." Henry's mouth twitched in something between a smile and a warning. "Detective, once this starts, he'll hit back hard. Favors, smears, anything he can." "I've been a cop long enough to know the truth doesn't shout," I said, "but it survives." 2 days later, my phone rang while I was mid-report. My father's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. 5 minutes later, a text. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I didn't respond. Another followed. This isn't a game. You're making a mistake you can't fix. I turned the phone face down and kept writing. Every message was just more evidence. By the end of that week, Elise's name was everywhere, not because of her dresses or her yacht poses, but because her real estate firm had been shuttered pending investigation. In the circles my father moved in, the details didn't matter, only the stain did. Morales called me after the news broke. "Saw the headlines," she said. "You finally pulling a thread?" "Something like that." "Well," she said, "don't stop until the whole sweater's gone." The real turning point came the following Thursday morning. Henry called at 7:15, his voice charged in a way I hadn't heard before. "We got the judge," he said. Full access to his corporate ledgers for the last 10 years. It felt like someone had handed me the keys to every locked drawer in my father's life. Contracts, payouts, side deals, all of it. I thought of his favorite line, "You can't fight what you can't see." He was about to learn what happened when someone saw everything. That afternoon, I drove past the marina where he kept the yacht. It was there, gleaming and still, no music, no movement. I parked far enough away that no one would notice me watching. In my head, I replayed the photo. His easy smile, the champagne, Elise's red dress. He'd posted it to declare himself untouchable. I kept it to remind myself he wasn't. The plan had momentum now, faster than I expected. Every move was by the book. No shortcuts, no favors. The same machinery he'd relied on to protect himself now grinding against him. Then the first counterpunch landed. A messenger dropped off an envelope at the precinct front desk. Heavy cream stock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing meant to intimidate before you even opened it. Inside, a demand for immediate cessation, threats of defamation suits, and enough polished legal language to choke a library. Henry read it once, then set it aside like it was a napkin. "Noise," he said. "They want you rattled." "I've been rattled before," I told him. "It didn't last." The next strike came through the department. The deputy chief called me into his office, his coat hanging on the back of his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Your father called," he said. "He's alleging misuse of departmental resources for a personal matter." Did he specify which resources I supposedly misused? Vaguely. Time, access, the prestige of the badge. He leaned forward. "I'm telling you because transparency matters." "Then let him put it in writing," I said. "If it comes in formally, internal affairs will do their job. I expect them to." He nodded. "Stay clean. Leave a paper trail." "I live in the drill," I said, and left his office. The station smelled like burnt coffee and rain-damp uniforms. The noise steadied me. Radios squawking, printers humming, the low chuckle of patrol coming in from the cold. If my father wanted to drag me into the dark, he'd have to get through a whole building full of people who knew what honest work looked like. Elise went loud online. Her first post was a perfectly lit selfie, chin tipped just so, the caption reading like a PR statement. "Women in business are always targets. Envy is a disease." 40,000 likes by sunset, a chorus of comments split between worship and venom. By the next afternoon, there was another post, this time a close-up of her wrist, faintly red where a bracelet might have rubbed. The caption, "Abuse. From whom?" 42,000 likes. I felt something hot rise in my chest, something old, but I let it pass. You can't argue with a hurricane by yelling at the wind. We pivoted. Henry filed a motion to compel production on one of her most questionable closings. We didn't just want summaries. We wanted every email, every timestamp. She could comply, or she could blink. Either way, it would tell us something. Meanwhile, my father kept calling. I didn't answer, but Henry insisted we archive every voicemail. That night, we played them through on Henry's laptop. My father's voice was a metronome of control, starting soft, then turning sharp, like a knife tested on paper. "Sweetheart, this is beneath you. These theatrics, this persecution." Click. "You're making a public fool of your mother. Do you want that?" Click. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it. I will not be destroyed by my own child." Henry paused the playback and glanced at me. He's performing for an audience of one, himself. "And his attorneys," I said. "He wants a judge to hear these and think I'm unstable." Henry's smile was dry as dust. "Good. Let them hear the subtext. Men like this always reveal themselves in the second paragraph." The smear campaign widened. A local gossip blog ran a piece with the headline, "Prominent business leader harassed by estranged daughter." A police detective. They used a photo of me leaving the courthouse, the sun carving my face into something harder than I felt. Anonymous family friends called my mother fragile, suggested I was reliving adolescent grudges. The comments section was a war zone, some vicious, some startlingly supportive. A retired nurse left a paragraph that began, "I used to see women come in with stories about cabinets." I printed that one and slid it into the folder, not because it was evidence, but because it was truth. 2 days later, Henry called with a note of something I didn't hear often from him, anticipation. "We have a visitor," he said. "Says he's your father's old partner. Name's Frank Delaney." Frank looked like a man who'd once worn success but outlived it. Suit gone a little soft at the seams, tie knot pulled just shy of neat. His hands were the kind you get from real work before money teaches you to hire it out. He didn't sit until I did, as if he needed to decide whether I'd earned the story he'd brought. "You look like your mother," he said. Then, catching himself, meant as a compliment. "It is," I told him. He folded his palms together, like he was bracing against something invisible, and began. They'd started the company in a rented garage, working with borrowed tools and a ledger book. My father had the numbers, Frank had the hands. It worked until shortcuts replaced craftsmanship. The efficiencies didn't meet code. Inspectors were suddenly cooperative after long lunches, jobs bid low and padded later with unforeseen costs. Then came the scaffolding incident. A worker fell. Badly. My father paid the man in cash to keep quiet. The man's wife didn't. Frank opened a battered envelope and slid it across Henry's desk. Inside were copies of invoices, a calendar with initials beside certain payment dates, and 2 photographs. Grainy, but clear enough to show the twisted steel. The paramedics bent over a man's body. The injured man's name was written in blue ink on the back. I felt the weight of it in my chest. "At home," I asked quietly, "was he the same?" Frank's jaw tightened. He believed people were raw material. You mold them or you crush them, but you never meet them where they are. Henry was already leafing through the papers, eyes narrowing. "Why now?" "Because I watched the news," Frank said. "Because I knew your mother once. And because the girl who used to keep score on her fingers at company picnics shouldn't be the only one carrying this." The room shifted in that moment, not with noise, but with gravity. Up until now, we'd been circling my father's money. But this was a different arena. Endangerment. Fraud, maybe criminal negligence. Things the DA's office would salivate over. That night, rain drummed the roof of my apartment. I made tea, didn't drink it, just paced. Morales texted, "You holding up?" "Yes, we have a witness. Old partner." "Good," she replied. "People like your father build mazes. Witnesses are doors." The maze fought back the next morning. My father's attorneys filed an emergency motion to quash our subpoenas, called it a fishing expedition, accused us of harassment, claimed we were overreaching. It was a move straight out of his playbook. Stall, muddy the water, buy time to shift the pieces. Henry didn't blink. "They're playing calendar games," he said. "If they can buy a week, they'll move assets or rewrite stories. We're not giving them a week." By noon, he'd filed our response, attaching Frank's documents and requesting an expedited hearing. He added a line that made my pulse quicken. "The pattern alleged herein endangers not only the petitioner's mother, but the public." The judge set the hearing for Monday. Over the weekend, Elise posted a sunset photo from an unnamed coastline with the caption, "They can't cancel what's real." The comments were a bonfire, some defending her, others linking to articles about the investigation. She didn't reply to any of them, which told me she'd finally started listening to counsel. Sunday evening, I drove out to my mother's with a bag of groceries and a bouquet of tulips that looked cheaper than I'd intended. She was making spaghetti. Too much garlic, the way I liked it. We ate quietly, the sauce spattering our plates. "You don't have to stay," she said as she wrapped foil over the leftovers. "I know," I said, "but I want to see you lock the door behind me." She did. The deadbolt clicked, the chain slid, and that small sound was louder to me than any thunder. On the porch, the air smelled like wet grass, and something just before a storm. Monday would come early. Monday morning smelled like rain-soaked stone and burnt coffee. The courthouse steps were slick, the kind that could drop you on your back if you weren't watching your footing. I climbed them slowly, my badge tucked in my purse instead of on my belt. This wasn't a day for uniforms. Henry was waiting outside the courtroom, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a slim leather portfolio. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Is he here?" A flick of his eyes toward the double doors. Front row, center, Elise next to him. Inside, my father sat in a navy suit, shoulders squared, mouth curved in that half-smirk he wore when he believed he already knew the ending. Elise was a study in composure, cream blouse, hair tucked back, her expression somewhere between concern and calculation. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses low on her nose. "Counsel, are we prepared to proceed?" Henry rose. "We are, Your Honor." My father's lawyer followed. "We are, Your Honor. However," the judge lifted a hand. "You'll have your turn. Petitioner, begin." Henry started with the protective order. One by one, the photos of my mother's injuries appeared on the overhead screen, each labeled with dates and signed by attending physicians. The shuffle of paper was the only sound in the room. "Objection," my father's lawyer said. "Relevance." "Overruled," the judge replied, without looking up. We moved to the financials. Corporate ledgers showing transfers to shell companies, then to Elise's brokerage. Sale dates that matched offshore wires within 24 hours. My father's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the table. Then Frank took the stand. He told the story of the scaffolding collapse, the inspector lunches, the off-book settlements, named names, produced invoices signed in my father's hand. The documents landed like stones in water, ripples spreading outward with each page. On cross, my father's lawyer tried to push him on dates, on memory. Frank tapped the envelope in front of him. "I keep records," he said. "Truth doesn't live in your head. It lives in ink." I saw my father's smirk falter, just a hair. What I didn't expect was the DA's office to make their move right there in the middle of the hearing. A young prosecutor in a charcoal suit stepped forward, introducing herself and informing the court that her office had opened a parallel criminal investigation based on the evidence we'd submitted. The judge leaned back in her chair, eyebrows lifting. "Proceed." The prosecutor displayed a set of closing documents from Elise's firm. The inconsistencies between reported commissions and sale prices were glaring, enough that even the spectators in the gallery started murmuring. "These transactions," she said, tapping the highlighted lines, "were followed by offshore transfers within 24 hours. Each LLC is linked to the respondent's corporate network." Elise's fingers tightened around her lap so hard I saw her knuckles blanch. She didn't look at my father. His attorney objected. "This is a civil matter. Fraud is fraud," the judge said, cutting him off. "If the DA sees probable cause, they have my leave to continue." Then my mother took the stand. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize, just told the truth in a tone so steady you could have balanced glass on it. She described years of being told she couldn't survive without him. Finances too complicated for her to waste her time understanding. Bruises that weren't anyone's business. The DA asked, "Why now?" She looked at me for a moment, then back to the prosecutor. "Because my daughter showed me the box she built, and I realized I didn't have to live inside his anymore." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the HVAC. When Henry rested our case, my father's posture had shifted, shoulders leaning forward, elbows braced on the table, smirk gone. Elise sat angled slightly toward the aisle, as if already planning her exit. The judge spoke without preamble. Protective order granted in full. All joint accounts remain frozen pending investigation. The respondent will produce complete corporate ledgers within 10 business days. This matter is referred for criminal review. A ripple moved through the gallery. My father finally looked at me. Not with rage, with disbelief, like he couldn't fathom how someone had dismantled his fortress from the inside out. I didn't blink. We filed out of the courtroom in a slow, deliberate procession. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Henry kept his voice low beside me. "You know this isn't over." "I know," I said. Behind me, I caught the sound of Elise's heels clicking away at speed. Someone asked her for a comment. She declined, without breaking stride. My father didn't speak at all, and for a man who thrived on controlling the narrative, that silence said more than any headline. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with petrichor. I paused at the curb, looking back at the courthouse, its symmetry, its columns, the illusion of permanence. That night, the coverage hit every local station. The images were predictable. My mother walking out beside Henry, my face half turned from the cameras, my father in the background looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. But justice doesn't feel like a fireworks finale. It's quieter, slower. Headlines roar for a day, Echoes fade within a week. What's left is something softer, a shift in gravity you only notice when you realize you're standing straighter. Months slid by. Winter shouldered into town, slow and heavy. The DA's office moved at a glacier's pace, but glaciers cut deep. My father's attorneys kept trying last-ditch maneuvers, continuances, character letters, even a motion to exclude the scaffolding photos due to the passage of time. The judge denied it with a line I wrote on a sticky note and tucked in my wallet. Truth scuffs. It doesn't fade. In March, the plea deal landed. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit bribery, criminal endangerment. He took it. Not because he was sorry. My father used apologies the way other men used cufflinks, but because the math was finally against him. Prison was on the table. He chose the smaller number and the cleaner story. The DA insisted on restitution, injured workers, defrauded buyers, back taxes, fines. The total was enough to make even me sit down. Elise cut her own deal. Cooperation in exchange for avoiding prison, a lifetime ban from real estate, and a fine that turned her shoulders into a slump at the defense table. In her final interview with the DA, she said 3 words that surprised me. I was scared. When they asked, "Of whom?" she didn't look up. Everyone. And somehow I believed her. The day the judge accepted my father's plea, the courtroom felt different, like a house finally aired out after years of stale air. My mother sat in the second row beside Henry, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She wore no makeup, no armor. She didn't need it. When the judge asked if any victims wished to speak, my mother glanced at me. I gave her the smallest nod. She stood and walked to the lectern, her steps unhurried. "I am not here to punish," she said. "Punishment came years ago, in my own kitchen, standing at my own sink. I am here to make sure harm ends where we choose to end it." The judge rested her chin on one hand, listening without interruption. My father stared at the table, his jaw rigid. "I intend to live," my mother finished. When she returned to her seat, the room felt heavier, but in a way that suggested the weight had shifted onto the right shoulders. Outside, reporters crowded the steps again. Henry gave them a brief statement. My mother smiled politely and kept walking. I kept my badge in my purse, not on my belt. There were parts of this story the cameras didn't deserve. We went straight to the bank. The clerk handed my mother a folder, forms to sign, accounts to transfer, liens to anticipate. She read every page, asked sharp questions that made the clerk sit up straighter. Then she signed, pressing each letter of her name like she was planting something. On the drive home, she watched the horizon through the passenger window. "I thought it would feel like fireworks," she said. "What does it feel like?" "Like a door closing," she said, "and a window opening somewhere I can't see yet." We found the window in April. It was on a coastal road where salt had bleached mailbox flags bone white. The cottage was small, 2 bedrooms, a porch that sagged, but still held promise. The realtor kept apologizing for the garden, calling it a bit wild. "We'll fix it," my mother said. And when she said we, she meant it. The first Saturday in the cottage, I built a raised bed in the sunniest patch of the yard, filling it with soil that smelled like rain waiting to happen. My mother came out carrying a tray of seedlings, tomatoes, basil, and 2 strawberry plants with leaves curled like folded napkins. "Morales says fear and tomatoes can't live in the same house," I told her, kneeling in the dirt. "Morales is right," she said, handing me a tomato start as if it were something fragile and alive. "Let's see if it's true for gardens." We planted in pairs, basil beside tomatoes, marigolds to keep pests away. I showed her how to water the roots, not the leaves. She showed me how to hum, not to drown out noise, but to invite bees. By late afternoon, the sun was spilling gold over the fence, and for the first time in years, she looked unshadowed. The first letter from my father arrived in May, forwarded from Henry's office. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days before opening it with a butter knife. It was exactly what I expected. Talk of misunderstandings, of being led astray by associates, of the cruelty of public opinion. He wrote about me like I was a storm that had damaged the coast but spared the lighthouse. He didn't write the words I'd once imagined hearing from him, back when I was young enough to believe they might come. I folded the letter along its creases and put it in a drawer. It wasn't for my mother to carry, and it wasn't for me to swallow. It was paper. And that's all it would ever be. June warmed the tomatoes into fat, green promises. My mother learned to tie them to stakes with soft strips of cloth. She wore a wide sun hat that made her look like she belonged in an old photograph, one from a country where people kept their word. I visited when I could, depending on my caseload. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes less. Each time I left, she locked the door behind me and waved from the porch, a small but certain motion, like a captain acknowledging calm seas. Work didn't stop just because my own storm had shifted. Domestic calls still came in. Some houses were tidy, some weren't. I could spot the angle of a woman's shoulders, the way a man filled a doorway as if he could own the oxygen. I did my job. I drew perimeters. I wrote reports that fit together like hinges, strong enough to hold a door in place if someone chose to open it. One Thursday, Henry called. His tone was so even, I almost missed what he was saying. "There's restitution money," he said. "More than your mother will ever need." "So we let it sit?" I asked. "Or," he said, "we move it. Small grants for women leaving violent homes. First month's rent. Locks. A used car. Fees to change a name if they need it. No speeches. Just practical help." I thought of the file that began with a jammed printer, the box we'd built, the tomato stakes in my mother's garden. "What do we call it?" he asked. I looked at my hands, still holding the faint trace of soil from my last visit to the cottage. "Not burn it all," I said. "We already burned what needed burning." He waited. "Begin again." The paperwork for Begin Again took a month. The first disbursement took 12 minutes. A woman from 3 towns over needed a locksmith and a bus ticket in the same afternoon. Henry approved it without ceremony. No public statements, no ribbon cutting, just a door opened quietly, the way safety should arrive. By July, the first tomato in my mother's garden blushed red, slow as a sunrise. She plucked it with both hands, laughing in a way I hadn't heard since I was small enough to be carried. We sliced it thin and ate it over the sink with a sprinkle of salt, juice running down our wrists. "Tastes like a decision," she said. That night, the ocean outside the cottage was steady breathing against the shore. I stepped onto the porch with my phone and typed a message for the people who had followed the story. Neighbors, strangers, nurses who remembered cabinets. If you've listened this far, thank you. If any part of this sounds like your house, know this. Doors can open. Help can be quiet and still be real. If you want to keep walking with us, share this with someone who needs a map. Or just stay. We'll keep a light on the porch. I hit send and set the phone down. Inside, my badge sat on the kitchen table, catching the warm light. My mother hummed at the sink, a tune without fear in it. The tomatoes breathed in the dark. Somewhere, a woman I didn't know turned a new lock and slept. I didn't need to come home unannounced anymore. Home announced itself.